Small business war stories. Small businesses are the soul of America. And this is where they tell their stories. I am your host, Pablo Fuentes. Of small businesses and good stories in general. Welcome to episode 128 of Small Business War Stories. And today I have a really interesting business. It's called Delmark Records, and I interviewed Julia Miller, who's the CEO. And this is really interesting because Delmark is a historic jazz and blues label in Chicago, Illinois. And Julia, together with Elbio, Barilari, who's her business partner, and a group of investors, bought the label, which has an extensive catalog of artists, legendary artists in the Chicago and beyond jazz and blues scene. And now Julia is working to continue the legacy of this label, and she has some really interesting, cool stories about the things they're doing to do this. And she has a background in the arts, and she was also a professor. She's a really, really interesting woman, and I learned a lot in this episode. This episode is brought to you by Gusto. Gusto is a small business solution for all the things, well, not all, a lot of the things that you don't want to do as a small business. So they'll help you run your payroll, run your benefits, and things like that are really a pain. And if you are a small business, you should definitely be looking at them. So go to gusto.com, GUSTO/war stories. And when you run your first payroll, you'll get 3 free months. And you'll help support the show, which is awesome. So without further ado, let's get into today's episode with Julia Miller of Delmark Records in Chicago, Illinois. And we are live here in beautiful Chicago, Illinois. And today I have the pleasure and honor to sit down with Julia Miller. And Julia is the president and CEO of Delmark Records. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's really awesome. I'm very thankful, first of all. We are the tail end of Blues Fest here on a Sunday evening. And you have taken the time to sit down with me and share your story. And I know that it's been a very intense last 3 days for you. So first of all, thank you.
Thank you.
And where to start? So Delmark is an iconic label, an iconic presence in the Chicago music scene. And really, as an extension of the Chicago music scene, blues being the music of America, really at the heart of what American heritage music really is, right? So you're in a really privileged, special position. I'd love to learn a little bit more. You have an art background, so you are an artist yourself, and you're also a music professor. How did you end up here in this position as the president and CEO of Delmark?
Well, I had always wanted to have and run a record label as an extension of my music and my art practice. I started wanting to have a record label in undergrad, so I was probably 19. A friend of mine mentioned, actually, we've known each other since we were both 19, so I don't know how long that is, I won't say, but a couple of years. But he said, I remember in undergrad you saying that you wanted to own a record label someday, and now here you are. You guys are running the label, and that's really amazing that you have followed your dream to do that. And so it's been a long time. I also was talking to my son. I have a 12-year-old son, and he's very entrepreneurial. And so I was telling him about how when I was his age, I really wanted to start my own business. And so I understand about that. And it took me a long time to follow up on that side. I was a creative and an artist and a musician and a professor for much longer, but I always had kind of small businesses on the side. And then I kind of made them more and more and more a focus until we jumped into this business, which is a very big business.
Yeah, that's amazing because so Delmark's been around for how long exactly now?
This is the 66th year. 66, so it was 65 last year.
Wow. So that is a long, long time. And you have been involved with the label for how long?
1 year.
1 year.
Almost exactly.
So let's talk about, there's so many questions here. So I do want to talk about how you come into this with an artist background. A lot of our audience are people who are either running small businesses or people who are considering stepping out into running their own small business. And there's a lot to unpack there. But before we go into that, I want to dive a little bit into the history of what Delmark was and what it is today and where it's going. Because Delmark was one of the leading record labels for blues in Chicago during a time when the blues were, I mean, you had Chess Records, and you had like a lot of the performers and people that associate very heavily with American blues history. So what's a little bit of the history, and how did you end up in this position?
Well, I admire Bob Kester Sr.'s ability to curate and find unique performances. The reason the catalog for Delmark exists is because he was able to find unique people and unique performances and really supported those. I, in my own artistic practice and in the sort of search for a business, had been very much at the forefront of that in my own work. Also, in my teaching, I have tried to help my students really pursue that, and I think it's really important as an artist to put your creative self first. So that is a way that I've come to that business, and I work with Elbio Barlari, who's also an artist and creative and professor himself, and of course Steve Wagner is the studio manager and label and studio manager, and so we're very devoted to the continuation of this artistic practice and the creative pursuit.
Yeah. So, how many different ownership groups have been involved with Delmark over the years?
Two.
Bob
was a sole proprietorship. It's one owner for 65 years, and then Delmark Records LLC purchased it, and it's been the LLC is an owner for a year, and then there's a president, vice president, artistic director, and the label and studio manager, and so.
What was that process like? I mean, that conversation. Take me back to the time when you first found out that buying Delmark was even a possibility, and what was that process like?
Well, we Elbio and I have a band together, and we had started a small label and a small independent release for our own projects. And I had on my own worked on a small series of releases and started growing it. So I had started businesses to understand how to do it in smaller versions, and explored that over, probably a decade, maybe even 20 years, depending if you look back on all the different smaller projects and how they would grow and grow and grow. And in order to approach this project, we planned for more than a year. We hired a CFO, and we planned for more than a year, and made a business plan and made projections about how we would go about it. And that's just the business side. That's not the creative side, which we feel underpins the business side. So we want the business to support the creative direction.
But both have to work, right? So because if you're not making
Correct.
money, you won't stick around.
Correct.
And if you're not making the right artistic, creative decisions, then you won't be around either.
Right. And it was definitely a lot of planning. We took the planning part very seriously. We didn't just sort of jump in and say, oh, here we are. It took a lot of really heavy financial work, which was why we worked with somebody who was a professional to help us, because we are definitely coming at this from a practical side, but not like a CFO side. Neither one of us are MBAs or anything like that.
And how did you focus on that? So what are the metrics that you thought about as you said, okay, we want Delmark to continue the greatness that it's how it's been a trailblazer in the industry for decades. So what are the metrics and the things that are important to you as you consider the future of the firm?
Well, the metrics. What do you mean the metrics?
Well, I mean, what are the things do you have a certain amount of releases that you target per year?
Oh, I see.
What are the kinds of things that matter to you as you think about this? Again, I'm thinking from the perspective of our audience and people who are maybe running their own business and just thinking about. It's always what I found for myself is even though I have a couple decades of experience in business, it's always interesting to hear how other people think about things because it sometimes clicks something that may have not clicked before.
Well, I grew up watching my family, my dad and my uncles operate a family business, and I sort of learned by omniscience or immersion or something, sort of watching.
Okay. Osmosis.
Osmosis. Thank you.
Yeah.
That's
Got
the
you.
right word.
I got you back.
Thank you. And so, I mean, I don't know what, like in terms of the metrics.
But do you think, for example, do you have to have a certain amount of releases per year, or is it only? How do you think about that?
Well, we made projections. Let's say that,
Yeah.
and some of the projections worked, and some of the projections we were like, maybe we should.
I would say that is, based on my experience, that is extraordinarily common. So welcome to the club.
Yeah. So, some projects are going really well, and some projects, we're going to have to really think about how to restructure it, and that's normal. But there hasn't been any huge issues, though.
Okay.
And we didn't base, one thing, we didn't base the success of the company on releases. Like it's not like, oh, we have to do this many releases or we're not going to make enough money. We built in revenue in other ways to support the operation of the business, and then are working on expanding the business to increase the profit for everybody involved, hopefully.
Do tell. What are the other revenue streams that you're creating for your business?
Yeah, much of the stream. Speaking of streaming, much of the support of the business is digital, but also creative projects like physical media, like our reel-to-reel project is.
I love that because I actually own a reel-to-reel player, which probably puts me in the minority of Americans.
I don't know. There's an audiophile audience that's completely into reel-to-reels and our, the boutique reel-to-reels that we're selling now.
Tell me more about that. How did that come about? I love that idea. How did that come about? They're not inexpensive pieces of music,
No,
but they're very much worth it.
Well, the one of the things that we have focused on, even in the plan of the business, was a combination of physical media and digital media. We weren't going to go, and we're not going to go completely digital ever. We all love physical media, records, tape, all this, all the obscure formats,
Yeah, you talking to somebody who has a reel-to-reel and 8-track.
I love 8-tracks. They're like my guilty pleasure. That's why I tell Steve. They're like, but I love them. And so there's a combination.
You should put out 8-tracks.
We have labels for a Hoodoo Man 8-track. There must be some on eBay somewhere, and I'd love to do some reissues of 8-tracks. That'd be great. But streaming is a really big. It's a really big foundation for us in growing the streaming, especially internationally, and for our artists too. Having digital, we dropped our first digital 45 release, our digital single, a couple weeks ago. Johnny Bergen and Charlie Musselwhite, and we want to definitely do more digital releases. We don't feel like there's a decrease in revenue, and there's an increase, and also it's easier for people. It's easier for the artists. They get, it doesn't decrease their audience or their airplay or anything like that. And you can pair them with CDs or LPs or whatever the artist wants to sell. Different artists like different media. So it just depends. So reel-to-reels, we're working on duplicating, making one-to-one audiophile copies and remastering of our catalog reels and selling those.
Wow.
And that came about because all three of us have backgrounds in tape Steve is very knowledgeable and sort of intimately familiar with all of the tape machines in Delmark, and there are like half a dozen tape machines. There's a huge historical physical media collection and all the masters. And I taught tape techniques here at the Art Institute for many years.
Wow.
Taught tape loops, 4-track, taught many people how to use tape and edit and use the splicing block.
I just recently bought a Tascam 388, so I need your help.
I love tape. It's great. You show people what the length of a tape loop is and how that correlates to physical time, like 15 ips, or like how many, what that is physically and how long it is, and it's a very different thing than a digital loop. Know. So, and Elbio also came up in his creative practice using tape, just from a historical point of view in his life. So we all used it and love it, and that was something that we had wanted to do as part of the business, especially because it goes along with the structure of the business.
So you see a little bit, so in a world where everything is available and you have more and more digital, and you can look at any video you want at any time, everything's available, like with a digital search, or any song ever published is available on your phone. I have found a lot of value in my life in things, so that I could, collect vinyl records, and I own typewriters, and I shoot only film, basically. Yeah. The intentionality of only doing that thing. Like one of my favorite things is to shoot medium format film, which you only get 12 frames.
Right.
And I actually even do even worse than that, the 4x5 negatives, which is like one shot, and then you gotta flip the plate and do a bunch of stuff. So how do you see, all these things ebb and flow in society, but you have like digital everything, available everything. How is having a record label focused on analog media, on tape, on that intentionality? How do you think about that, and how you fit into where culture and society is today?
Well, I don't think that I think they go together. I don't think that they contradict one another. My son is an example. He's a device guy. He's the 12 to 20 and even older people now stream and listen to music on devices. And what we find is that it doesn't matter how many devices or how many streams you have. People will do different services in their car, different services on their phone, different services on their whatever, so that streaming is really a way people listen to music. What we're interested in is the audiophile streaming. We partnered with Qobuz, for example, which is an audiophile streaming service, and they do higher bitrate, high resolution audio, which is something that we are very interested in. It sounds better, sounds great, and we also do all the other streaming service having streaming accessible for that. But it doesn't, it partners with the physicality. It just depends on, what you like. You can't always, it's not always practical, of course, to have physical media in this time. I mean, I grew up in an era where I remember 8-tracks in cars, and you think about how to install an 8-track in a car. Like,
so
there's
the first ever music that was not radio in a car was an 8-track. Rolls Royces used to have them, and it was because you could obviously there were some kind of gimmicky spinner, you could spin 45s in your car, but then obviously every time you skip the needle, that wouldn't be very great. That was a big first application of 8-tracks. Yeah.
And so there you go in, think about what goes into wiring, wiring audio into a car historically or into any location, and that physical media is not as practical. You can't have tape everywhere. I mean, you could, but I would. Yeah. But I don't know. But so we listen. The fact is that I listen to music on Bluetooth with my device in my car.
Sure.
So And then when I want to slow down, I want to really have a different kind of experience, I put an A-track in, or I put a reel on, or I listen to an LP.
Yeah.
And so it kind of depends on my mood and what I feel like.
Yeah, for sure. And also, I mean, you have the digital discovery, and then you get the, you buy the physical media, support the artist. And I interviewed Gold Rush Vinyl, which is a woman-owned plant in Austin, Texas, which is actually pressing Carl Weathersby's Live at Roses release. And they talk about, like, the statistic is insane. It's like, I want to say, I'm going to butcher Karen's quote, but it's like 40% of vinyl never gets opened or something like that. It's just people just want to have the thing.
Oh yeah, it's an object.
Yeah,
it's an object. It's an art object. It's a thing for sure.
Yeah, like the beauty, like the art, the cover art matters. The weight of it matters. Everything.
It can, although it depends on the source and what, sort of what the audience or what the person is looking for. I like to search for used vinyl too, and used all different physical media, not just vinyl. But it's there's one thing to have the brand new object, which is sort of an artistic product, but there's another thing to sort of come upon the unique thing that you find.
Yeah.
And that's
the treasure hunt.
The treasure hunt. Exactly.
Yeah. If anybody's listening to this podcast and they have a Tomato release Towns Van Zandt record, let me know. Hit me up. That's my holy grail. Hey, we'll take a quick break here from the conversation to do a quick bit about our sponsor, Gusto. That's Gusto. I want you to ask yourself, why did you start your business? Or if you haven't started yet, why do you want to start your business? It's probably to do things that you're passionate about. And very few people I've come across in my travels are really passionate about running payroll or about, dealing with benefits. Those are all things you have to do, especially if you have employees as you start growing. But they are a pain in the butt. I know I've dealt with it before when I started my business, and it was certainly something that as soon as possible I try to find somebody to help me with. So you should go check out Gusto, Gusto. Go to gusto.com/war stories. And when you sign up there, you get 3 free months when you run your first payroll. So go check it out. Let's talk about, so we've touched upon physical media and digital media and how streaming revenues are important for artists. Let's talk about, we are in 2019. What is the role of record labels in a world where distribution is democratized? Like, why are record labels important? What are the things that you do that maybe an artist is listening is like, I don't need a record label. I have YouTube. I have, I can put my things on whatever streaming, hosting and provider I want. So how do you think about that?
Well, it's important to step back for a minute on this subject, because Delmark is really unique. Delmark is a record label, but it's also an historical archive. So it's a little different than a typical music business position. It is definitely a business, and it's a music business, but it's not the same kind of functionality as a record label might be. It's this kind of a really unique world.
Okay.
So there's that. And it is different to have a record label, to be on a record label in terms of the support you get or should get from a label. It's very difficult to do everything yourself. And having a sort of critical mass from the record label, if the label is working as it should for the artist, then that artist should be getting some support from the critical mass of the label. And that's the way we feel. We take on creative projects that we support, and we promote them, and we connect people. We connect artists on the label with other artists. So it's part of that larger picture. And the labels do have music business access that independent artists just don't. It's a different.
Like what do you mean? Tell me more about that.
Well, there are business to business opportunities. There's just advertising opportunities. There's more. It's a different level of the business. Now, that being said, I also, on my own work, have been, and we've been a independent artists for a really long time. And as a creative process, that's totally cool. And as a business process, it can be cool too. It just depends on what you want. But the labels function for artistic support and in a larger picture.
So give me some details. What are the things that you do for artists that maybe they would struggle to do on their own?
Well, we have a studio, and we use the studio in the creative process. It's part of how we support artists. We have our artists have access to the studio, and we record them and help them. We help them. We produce them or help them if they want to work with a producer. Mm-hmm. We promote them. We put ads. We connect them with other artists. We support the releases. Mm-hmm. We do the whole release from beginning to end, and then it's distributed.
Yeah. So one of the big things is like, when the record's done, that doesn't mean you're done, right? So
Absolutely
the record's
not.
done, and
No.
So what happens after that?
Yeah. Well, we promote the record and we do hundreds of mailings to radio. We still do radio, and DJs and internet, and we do ads to support it. We sometimes help with bookings, although we're not booking agents at all. Partially because we've only been in this a year, so I don't know. That's we're sort of positive support in that way, but we're not business support.
Got it. So one of the things that's interesting that you mentioned is like, it's okay for independent artists to want to do their own thing. It just depends on what you want.
Yeah,
so
it completely depends on what you want.
Is there a line maybe, or like a division where you would say, like, if you want to do this, go do it on your own. However, if you would like to do this other thing, do it with a label. What is that division? What is that split?
Well, I don't know that there's a division, but I think saying that is totally valid. I think it's absolutely, it can be the case.
So what's the difference? So what are for example, like using real life examples, like if you're a new artist, what are the things that, if you want to do that, like, in which cases should independent artists remain independent, and in which cases should they seek a label?
I don't know how I can say that for anybody. That's
sure.
That's a personal question.
Sure, but based on your experience, what do you think?
It depends on how interested in the business side they are.
Okay.
And I think it depends on how interested in control, probably control of the creative process, although not completely. But in terms of experimental music can be pretty much completely about just trying something, or in the control of the creative process, and that is a real specific thing.
Yeah.
Although, I did a lot of experimental music for a long time, and know a lot of people doing that. And one of the things that really helped me was actually being on a net label, which is a very well curated net label here in Chicago called Pawnee Roses, and this is a net label started by Keith Helt, and he is actually a librarian and archivist, and it was his passion to really really organize and promote experimental music, and then he released to the Creative Commons. Okay, so what this did was it gave people a chance and a platform for a wider exposure. So when you release to the Creative Commons, your music goes out everywhere, and you get a lot of feedback from that. You find 5 listeners in Belgrade and 4 listeners in Sao Paulo or wherever, and so but in the total, you get a lot of audience from that you wouldn't find in other ways.
Yeah.
And that is an example in a way that you a label can really support and foster creativity, and then also support audience.
Okay.
Now, and that's a digital label, and also there wasn't really a budget involved in that point. You know, it was a different era in our work, in our lives, but also it's just a different kind of model. Once you start getting into a business side, then there are other considerations and choices to make.
That makes sense. How do you go about finding new artists? Like you were talking about finding extraordinary performances or extraordinary artists, and how do you make that decision? What's your A&R process?
A&R process.
Well, that's what the label lingo is, right?
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah,
but I told you, Delmark is not. Delmark is its own thing.
Yeah, but you're the person that's leading.
Artist and representation. That's funny. That's
like that's what they call. Isn't that what labels call the people that find? Maybe I'm out of date on that.
That's like from like payola in 1960.
Sure, maybe I'm out of date. I don't know labels.
No, you're probably right. No, I just again, you gotta understand that Delmark is really not. It's its own unique thing. Mm-hmm. So I can't really speak to how the music business works. And I can't really only speak to how the creative business or creative process works.
Yeah, I'm interested in your story, not.
So yeah, I mean, I didn't come through this with a music business MBA or anything like that. Yeah. So, and that's fine, but it's a different thing.
So let's rephrase that. Forget about the word A&R. How do you decide which artists you want to put on your label?
We look for unique performances, and we look for unique voices. We look for unique recording techniques and creative recording techniques. And we're very interested in fostering a high level of production. Now, it doesn't mean that everything has to be really produced. We do live recordings too. And we do documentary recordings, and we're interested in all those kinds of things, but we like the process. And so we like to tailor the process for what people want to do. Now, we can do really, really fancy things, and we can do also really, really simple things. Like, for example, one of the projects that I'm undertaking now is a reconstruction of Big Joe Williams' guitar. Okay, so this is...
I am actually familiar with what this guitar looks like, but for our audience who may not know, what's special about his guitar? It
has 9 strings.
Yeah.
It's one of the guitars. There are many. He had more than one.
You're talking about the silver tone that has 3 tuners at the top.
It's not... Yeah, it's a Harmony Sovereign. It's an acoustic guitar.
Oh, okay. Yeah, but you also had an electric one.
He did.
A silver tone, yeah.
He did have several guitars. This is an acoustic guitar, and it did have a pickup at one time, a D-Armond, but it doesn't anymore.
The Rhythm Chief, right? Yeah.
It's the Monkey on a Stick.
Yeah, Monkey on a Stick, Rhythm Chief. Yeah, I restore electric guitar, so I'm a big student of these.
Okay, so we have his original guitar, and the guitar has like masking tape around it, and it's like the guitar is never going to be playable again. And even if you wanted to make it playable, it would make it like a different guitar. You couldn't really do that, so you wouldn't want to do it. So, but the process that he went through to make his music, he would he would pick a guitar, and then he would add things to it when he needed it. He'd add a pick guard. He'd cut the nut. He'd add tuners if he wanted some more strings. He'd add a tailpiece, and then he'd adapt the guitar as he needed it. And he did this over and over again. So he was also known for changing his tunings and being very, very, particular about his tunings, that they were proprietary and secret. Yes, they're secret. Yeah.
Secret tunings.
So, he did that, and he also had his amp had like a plate tacked to it and and I think a beer can sort of hanging off. So it was there were all these sounds and resonances and it was a very it's a really great timbre, and a very great process. And so I found another Harmony Sovereign, same model, and we're working on fixing it to be playable and adapting it and adding the strings, so we'll have a
Yeah.
playable Big Joe Williams guitar.
Yeah, and recreate it with that. And actually, it's really hard to install a monkey on a stick pickup on those, because the monkey on a stick was originally, I think, designed for an arch top, and it attaches to the strings behind the bridge.
Okay.
And Sovereigns don't have that. Sovereigns have a fixed bridge.
Sure.
So if you look at Elmore James' old guitar. I got to be careful. I don't have to be. I get really nerdy about these things.
No, I know.
Elmore James used to have two differently wired Diarman pickups: a regular soundhole pickup, and then a Rhythm Chief pickup on the bridge that was wired to something else.
Okay.
And that is an easier way to do that with that monkey on a stick on a fixed bridge guitar. I got to be careful with these things. I'll shut up now because our audience doesn't care about nerdy guitar things.
Yeah, no, but I'm going to go down that road too. So when we're done with the podcast, then we can nerd out.
Yeah,
about
I'm happy to talk about it more. I mean, I love this kind of stuff. I found old guitars in the road and I bring them back to Austin and restore them. So.
Well, so that's great. So this is a project that's a very specific creative project and a very
that's awesome.
kind of low tech project. Okay, so whereas we have other projects like this, we're doing a record now with Guy King, and this project is a very detailed and very studio record with guests who are very specific and lots of overdubs, and it's very highly produced and well produced.
Yep.
Also, we're doing a jazz record with the Metropolitan Jazz Octet.
Wow.
And Dee Alexander, which is an homage to Billie Holiday.
Okay.
And that record is it's a big band, very audiophile. Dee Alexander, amazing singer. So it's the scope between those projects is enormous, and we love that. That we pick projects that are very unique in that way. It doesn't.
So let's say that you have this. What are you planning on doing with this physical, like the guitar when you're reconstructing it? Are you going to show it? What do you want to do with it?
Well, no, we want to play it.
Okay.
We want to play it, and we want to have we're going to have Delmark artists record.
Nice.
Either new songs that they write, or they can record Big Joe Williams songs, but be inspired by the instrument. So so that the reason to redo it is so that it is playable.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
So you're gonna have a big A&R party with them.
Exactly.
I'm just playing. Can you think of a time when things were really wrong in your business, and what did you do about it?
Really wrong? I would never say.
Well, okay. a time when you had a huge challenge. I mean, virtually every guest I've ever had on the show at some point had like an oh shit moment. So what was your oh shit moment?
Yeah, there's it's only been a year, so there are a lot of challenges with the business.
I bet.
Yeah, and so not to go into too much detail, but the business was very much connected to the store. And now the store is a separate business.
What's the store?
Bob Sr. had a store. First, he started the Jazz Record Mart in Chicago.
Oh, okay.
Right, and he continued through. Now he has Bob's Blues and Jazz. So now the Delmark Records is.
So Delmark Records and Jazz. What's this store called?
The first store was the Jazz Record Mart, which is a huge record store in Chicago.
And they were connected.
They were connected, yeah.
Yep.
And so Delmark is a label and a studio, and it's its own thing, Delmark Records.
Yeah.
So that's a big challenge.
Yeah,
it's a completely different model. And
probably get a lot of questions too, like what happened, what's going on.
Well, we don't get so many questions about what happened anymore, but people, it is a challenge when you take over a business that has been going for 65 years. Because it's hard for people to understand what's different, or like why it's separate, or how is it working, or is it, people associate that, and it's understandable. Yeah.
So how do you address I'm sure that there are things that were being done before that you're still doing, things that were being done before that you no longer do, and things that were not being done before that you all of a sudden started doing. I'm sure that this whole, making instruments is a big...
Well, the only thing I'm going to say about that is just that it's a very different business model, because it's a very different business. It's not a retail business.
Right. So you're kind of...
we have retail online, but that's it.
You're kind of in the curation business, like you're in art curation and...
Well, that's what a record label does.
Yeah.
Or should do, part of it anyway.
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Do you see what is the landscape for record labels now? Are more record labels being started? Are more record labels sunsetting? Do more record labels exist today than did 20 years ago, or fewer? How does that work? I have no idea.
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I mean, I'm like, Delmark is a really different thing. It's
Yeah.
it's not, you know, we're not comparable to Sony or, some other Warner or some kind of thing.
Yeah.
We're not we're not really comparable to much.
Yeah.
Anyway, I don't really like to, I would never base a business off of some other thing.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong about that. I mean, maybe it's like shows like my anti-business background or something. I don't know, but I mean, it just doesn't. I can't really comment on the state of the record label business.
Have you thought more about how you want to be a part of the music scene in Chicago? So, for example, there's today we went to the Chicago History Museum, and there's an exposition on amplified blues there. We spent some time at Chess Records, and connected with the folks at the Blues Heaven Foundation there, where they're having people come there and can get a feel for the history of the blues. Given the history that you have in Chicago, have you thought about having a physical location where maybe people can see these guitars that you're working on, or maybe people can see your process and the art, the things that you're curating and doing?
Well, we do have a physical location.
Oh, it's where people can come visit.
Yeah.
Oh,
there's a
see,
studio.
I didn't know that. Tell me more about that space.
4121 North Rockwell. It's been at the studio has been at that.
And it's open to the public. See, I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah, I mean it's not a storefront.
Okay.
But we have a gallery space.
Okay.
And the studio is there, and it's a business that's open, and we have hours daily. We're there 5 days a week.
Okay. Awesome. I wasn't unaware of that.
Yep.
So maybe I should go by there.
You should. You can go. You should go by there.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So what is your vision for that space? Are there things that you want to add to that excite you?
Well, we are working on the space all the time. The space is the studio is built as a model for the control room from Chess.
Okay.
And Malcolm Chisholm designed that.
Okay.
And so the sound is really important. It's a room within a room. Basically, we have a 6,000 foot warehouse space, and the studio is a room built inside that. And then we have a warehouse, and then the front is a gallery space, and we have offices. So it's a big location.
Yeah.
We hope to modernize it more. We will retain the historical nature of the studio. We're not going to change that, but we want to add, more digital technology to the studio. And do more innovations in the offices too.
Are most of the machines you have there now analog machines? Or?
Yeah, we have a half dozen tape machines. We
Okay.
have a Neotech board, analog board.
Mm-hmm.
We have a lot of analog gear. The Pultec EQs from Chess we own.
Okay.
We have a B3 organ from Chess.
Yep.
We have a lot of gear in there. We also have Pro Tools Ultimate, so we have modern digital capabilities.
That is awesome. If people are interested in learning more about you, what are your websites, physical handles? You mentioned the address for Delmark. Where can people find you?
www.delmark.com.
Okay.
Yeah,
and
delmark.com.
And then you are on Instagram as well?
Yep, and Facebook.
Okay. And any other upcoming events that you have and things that people might be interested in?
Yeah, we have 7 new blues releases and 3 jazz releases coming up.
Wow.
I've been up and through the
Busy.
fall. Yeah. And also on Monday for 2 weeks, we're going to have a photo exhibit in the gallery, which is our photos from the Ann Arbor Blues Fest. So the Delmark Records was very involved in the start of the Ann Arbor Blues Fest. And there's this photo exhibit that are original photos, many Delmark artists. And that photo exhibit is going to travel to Delmark. We're going to hang it for 2 weeks, and then it's going to go on to Austin, actually.
Wow.
And tour. But so
I'll help you get some folks out there. Where are you going to be showing in Austin?
It's not our exhibit it's the Ann Arbor Blues Fest. So it's going to be
Got it.
in Delmark for 2 weeks, and then it goes on tour.
Well, we'll have to check it out.
Cool.
Julia Miller, President and CEO of Delmark Records. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me today.
Thank you.
And I look forward to staying in touch.
Yeah,
Take
likewise.
Small business war stories. Small businesses are the soul of America. And this is where they tell their stories. I am your host, Pablo Fuentes.